Welcome to The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky, a weekly podcast that breaks down politics, policy, and current affairs. I'm Becky Scherr.
And I'm Michael Brodkorb.
As promised, we are back with a second episode this week to break down the Republican National Convention. If you haven't already listened, be sure to check out our recent episode covering the Trump assassination attempt over the weekend. Today, we are joined by two returning guests, Fenton and John Rouleau. Kelly served in the state legislature and is former deputy chair of the Republican Party of Minnesota. Currently, she is joining us from our hotel room in Milwaukee as she is a national delegate representing Minnesota. John was just on earlier this month, but as a reminder, John is the executive director of the Minnesota Jobs Coalition and has long been active in Republican politics and campaigning. John is also heading to Milwaukee to attend parts of the convention this week. Today, we'll start by breaking down the first night of the convention, which included Donald J. Trump officially receiving the GOP nomination. We will, of course, break down Trump's new VP nominee, J.D. Vance from Ohio, and we will give our personal thoughts and what we think it does for the ticket. Then we will preview what is to come in the remaining days in Milwaukee. Thanks for joining us and enjoy the show. We are excited to welcome back both Kelly and John today. Thank you both for being with us. Big week this week. The RNC convention has officially kicked off. Kelly, you are in Milwaukee. And so why don't you just start by maybe telling us about how the first day has gone, the vibe of the convention? What's the overall feel there?
I gotta say, I've been to other conventions, and the overall feel is there's an energy I haven't seen in the last few conventions that I've attended. People seem really excited, unified. It's interesting. We got through the convention business rules and platform and all of that really quickly, which if you've attended conventions before, usually that's sometimes takes the most time. And that first day, we got through it so quickly, which signifies to me that there is very much unity in that room and unity behind Trump, who officially got the nomination with the roll call yesterday.
Always a exciting time to hear the states stand up and do their thing. I've been to one convention in the past, and it's certainly an energizing feeling for sure. Day one was Republicans trying to chip away at the Democratic coalition, is what I've seen as a theme in some of the articles I've been reading about. There are 5 Black Republicans in Congress. 4 of them spoke on stage on Monday, a Latina woman. We had a union leader. So it certainly seems that there has been movement. We have seen in the polls amongst different coalition groups, different demographics. John, what's your take on the RNC really wanting to make that apparent and show that the Republican Party is not just the party of the old white guy?
I think that it's really interesting looking at where the party went yesterday, but more broadly, where it's gone for the last 8 years. Looking at we are in the midst of a political realignment. You can see that with the policies that are being championed. You can see that with the Republican Party's platform that has tweaked, and see how much that has changed over the last 10, 12 years. But I think that there's plenty of room in the Republican Party for anyone who believes that America is a place where you should be able to go out and create a better life for yourself, to have more opportunity, and that there is a belief that the American people are the ones who create that opportunity, not the government. And that's a message that I think can cut across all sorts of different socioeconomic backgrounds, different cultures, different religions, different ethnicities. Really, that's a unifying thing, and there's a lot of opportunity. The other thing that I think makes it really unique this year is just how disliked President Biden is, and the policies that he has supported over the past 3.5 years or so, where you're seeing some of those historically Democratic leaning coalitions starting to move away from there. And I don't know that we have seen them fully come over to the Republican side. Clearly, there is data out there that the organizers of the RNC, that the Trump campaign are seeing, that says these are audiences that are worth going after, worth going and talking, and worth inviting into the tent.
Go ahead, Kelly.
I want to add, it was very much yesterday, you could see the theme was very much surrounding prosperity, the hardworking American, how hard Americans are fighting to just make ends meet. I loved how the diversity of the speakers, you had salt of the earth, everyday speakers, from the single mom who is raising her husband, died of drug overdose, but she struggled just being a single mother, raising her children. You had the lady from Guatemala. I love what she said, wake up and smell the cafecita. But she talked about there's three people in her household hold that, but between the three, they have six jobs and they're still struggling in spite of that. You had Amber Rose with a little bit of different message, but very much on brand with where they're going. I fell for the lies of the media, just like all of you don't believe them. And then you had Sean O'Brien, historically first Teamster head of the union to be invited to speak. Loved what he said. America belongs to the workers of America. So the message overall was very diverse, but all surrounding the struggling of the economy. You had the signs were handed out, make Americans wealthy again. There was another sign that was Trump equals prosperity, Biden equals inflation. Yesterday's theme, but the diversity was well received, as well as you had the notables, like the members of Congress. And on the floor, even though you had old former governors, former strategists, former just active people like Newt Gingrich was on the floor. Governor Walker was there. Governor Sanders was walking the floor. It was great to see what some may call establishment with newcomers all coming together and represented there yesterday.
Michael, we've talked a lot about the Republicans kind of having an optics problem and how we need to work to show that we are a big tent party and that we have supporters from all of these different groups. We represent different groups, that the Democratic Party no longer is the party of the union worker, the minority, all of these different folks. What's your take on the Republicans really trying to lean into that and show on the world or a countrywide scale that this is who we are?
It was very interesting to watch last night because I thought it was well presented in terms of the optics. As someone who's not was not been to national conventions before, this had a very there wasn't a full convention in 2020, excuse me. There wasn't a full convention in 2020 because of some of COVID limitations. And so watching this convention, I was seeing some of the live feed and then also what was being broadcast as I was rotating through the stations. The convention yesterday, the opening day, had a very traditional aesthetic feel in terms of the energy and enthusiasm. It was very clear that it was a very united and energized crowd for Donald Trump. Now, what's interesting about that is because in 16 in Cleveland, there was some tension. There was some animosity at that convention about his candidacy. And so this was a incredibly, I think, from an optics standpoint, it was an incredibly unifying event. I think the crowd, you could feel the energy from the crowd from where I was just watching them. It was incredibly, I could just tell that enthusiasm was coming through. And it had that type of when I started watching conventions and having gone to a few of them, it had that kind of feel to it. And I think that's been missing a little bit from Trump's nomination process a bit. And so it had a little bit of that traditional look and feel, that energy. The optics of it, I think, to see a union, someone a union speaker, to see some of the people that spoke, it was, I think the Republicans that were organizing this did as a good a job as they could to present as a unique perspective on the party in terms of who they highlighted and who they spoke. I saw some of the feed versus what was broadcast, and there was a distinction between some of those. But overall, I would say to you that I was very surprised about the optics of it, and I think that the RNC did a very good job of presenting it last night. Let me just also say for a moment that as someone and Becky, we talked about this, as someone who did not vote for Trump in 16, 20, or 20 in 24 so far, I'm not voting for him this year round. I have to tell you just an observation that I made. He looked different last night. He looked different last night than I've ever seen him before. I saw someone who I think looked changed. And I'm very interested to see what he says later in the week. But physically, and I'm not talking about all of this in a complimentary way. He looked I saw more emotion on his face. I saw him, I could get a sense from him that he was soaking in the experience and what was going on. I saw a lot more emotion on his family's faces. And one of the things that we talked about yesterday, Becky, for an episode that we released this morning, was about the kind of the dehumanization of politics and how people are it's there's this we're dehumanizing who these people are. I, at least as someone who is not a Trump supporter, not a Trump voter, I saw him in an entirely different way yesterday. Now, my vote's not changing, but I saw him in just it just seemed to me, as someone who's been a critic, that when I saw him walk out there, the minute I saw him walking through the convention, I saw him seated, and I saw the way his family reacted, that something has changed. And I think we all know what that has happened. What has that made a change? And I'm going to be very curious. I'm going to be paying much more attention to this convention. And I already was going to pay much more attention to this because I don't have a life and I'm a political junkie. But I am so interested to see what comes out of his mouth and how he acts in the coming days, because I do believe he is a changed that the experience of Saturday has changed him in some way.
Kelly, what's your take on, because I agree. And Kelly, I'm curious if you are, while you're there and talking to folks, and as you mentioned and listed off a litany of kind of those establishment Republicans who may not always be super MAGA all the time, do you feel that too? Do you feel like there is more unity behind Trump, whether that's just because of the last 72 hours or just in general this election cycle and what's been going on with Biden? Is that kind of something you're hearing or seeing, or what's your take on that?
I think it's all the moving pieces together. People are just coming and unifying behind Trump. I'm a perfect example. I came in to this convention as a Haley delegate. She did release her delegates in the end. I agree with what Haley said, is that when she's looking for who she's going to vote for, are both candidates perfect? No, she said both are actually flawed, but one is better than the other. And I'm going to be looking for someone who loves America, who is going to secure our border, who's going to help our economy, who's going to it, bring law and order back. And that's Trump. That was basically paraphrasing what Nikki Haley said. And I agree with that. And I'm seeing it. I'm seeing that unity coming together. I think what happened the other day also intensified the unity, but probably I think that event will make sure that anybody who supports or remotely likes Trump will not stay home. They will all make sure that they do their due diligence and get out and vote. But they're definitely, but I have to say, from being a delegate, and I was here early for the rules committee. I was asked to serve on the rules committee, and his campaign team this time, they did the work. They did the work to make sure everybody was on board. Made some changes in the platform, but they also got whips. They divvied up. They had people call their delegation. They knew what they would be facing coming into this convention. That to me was different from 2016, but he did the work to bring people together, to do his best to bring everybody together and behind these changes, which I thought was great, because literally there was no rules fight. There was no platform fight. There was just traditional protocol and procedures that we all followed and made it through. I've got to commend his campaign team. I am also agree. There was Trump is different. The word on the ground immediately is he tore up his speech that he was going to be giving on Thursday, and they're going back to the drawing board. And you look at him last night, you had the priest at the end that came out to give the closing prayer, and he made fun of Trump. He made fun of him a little bit, and Trump laughed. They got a good laugh out of him. It's bizarre for what's happened to this man. He seems more relaxed, or I agree, there's something definitely so many moving pieces, but whatever, everything that's happened has moved people to Trump. And I'm one of those people.
Jen, I know you've been involved in a lot of contentious conventions, or in attendance at least. And when we spoke with you and Kip a while back when Trump was first visiting Minnesota earlier this year, That was something we talked to you guys about, that you guys both you had expressed that you think that Trump is being more of a team player and is embracing and propping up other candidates a little bit maybe more than he has done in the past, and it seems that's the case. Is it surprising to you, or is this what you're also seeing, that the Trump campaign and the extra work they're putting into making everybody cohesive and unified, is that a surprise, or is this what you're also seeing and hearing from your side of things?
Yeah, we're seeing it's fascinating to see. And I think it starts at the top with President Trump, but then it comes down to his campaign staff. The campaign staff and team that he has assembled really are not divisive people. They are people who have a long track record of working for a whole lot of different types of candidates across the country and working well together. But I think that there's a very real recognition on the Republican side, especially over, I would say, the past month, that as we see the division on the Democratic side of the aisle, countless members of Congress and donors and all of that saying that Joe Biden needs to get out of the race. But there's really a effort to unify on our side. And I think a lot of that is credit to Donald Trump, who it seems like has by and large moved on from kind of the politics of revenge. I know that was, a big thing in 2020, looking at those primaries where if you weren't with Trump, you were against him. Certainly there's still some of that here and there, but it is not like it was. And just the little fights that don't even really spill out into public about consultants and don't hire this team and don't hire that team and kind of word coming down from the top. I think that there's definitely a push towards more unity, and it'll be fascinating to see where that goes on policy. I have always said that Republicans need to be united when it comes to the elections, and we can go argue over policy, but if you're not in the majority, if you don't have the White House, if you don't have the governor's office, then you're just hosting a debate club amongst yourself because you can't impact policy from the minorities. I'll be curious how that works if President Trump is successful in winning another term. But for right now, there's a very, very obvious feeling of unity on the Republican side of the aisle.
There's one more thing I just want to say. I had a conversation with Jeff Colby yesterday, and we were talking about this, and he said something that kind of set me back, and he was right. And I want to just relay what he said because I think it's important to remember. I think there is this, and it really stems from my conversation that Becky and I had with on an episode we had with Brian Strauser and Shannon Watson, just talking about what happened and how we can unify. But I think there is an expectation that this should change the dynamic of the race in some way, that it hopefully is a unifying moment for the country. It certainly is a unifying moment for Republicans, because it was interesting as I was watching the convention last night and flipping between the streams and broadcast coverage. There was a lot of news that was reporting about Biden and continued dissatisfaction with him, and I think there's the effort to potentially remove him or get him off the ticket continues. But there was Jeff said something yesterday that I think is important to remember, that Trump was shot at on Saturday, and as much as we want, I think, and as Becky and I discussed yesterday, want there to be a moment where our better angels are going to come out. There is a part of me that says that Trump gets to be angry in some way for what happened. And that should be, we should, I think, he I can't imagine what he's going through. Someone that was shot on Saturday, nearly lost his life, and how he's been able to move forward in this. And part of the reason I just want to just reflect on that is because I do think we've lost a lot of the human element in this, and these aren't robots. And as much as I think we dehumanize so much in politics, I just want to just say that as much as I have an expectation that Biden tampers down some of his rhetoric, the Democrats do, and Republicans do, if there is one person who I think gets to be angry, it's Donald Trump, who I think gets to be and gets to go through that grieving process, because uh, getting shot at is and nearly losing his life is something that we can't diminish whenever that happens. But certainly not. Donald Trump should be given the absolute same amount of space to grieve, to go through the emotional reaction that he needs to continue going on. Even though I disagree with his politics and disagree with his candidacy, he is a human being. And I hope that as much as we see unity, I also think that we have to remember that this is someone who has gone through an incredibly tragic and horrific situation that I hope no one ever else has to experience. But I think there's a lot of, as much as the tensions are high right now and there's a lot of expectations, I'm also from the standpoint of that I think the former president, now more than ever, needs to lead and be unifying, but I also think he deserves some grace.
Absolutely. But Kelly, did you have something on that?
I would just add to that right now, it's amazing, but Trump's biggest concern and sadness, greatest sadness, is the loss of the life of the supporter at his rally. The fact that a mother lost her husband and a daughter lost her father, that has been forefront here on the ground of things that he is most upset about. But also at the same time, I think he's still processing all of this.
Understandable. I literally can't imagine. Very well put. I appreciate that insight, Kelly, and I am glad and grateful that the gentleman who lost his life and the impact obviously on his family is being shown and felt around there. We did see Trump on stage last night. He joined JD Vance, his new running mate. So I want to get into, obviously not completely convention related, but announced on the first day of the convention, we have vice presidential candidate JD Vance was selected. So just going to go through a little bit of the background here. Yesterday and leading up to yesterday, some of the betting pools had Vance as the favorite. Yesterday morning, it took over or switched a little bit. Youngkin from Virginia took over as leading the way. And then we got what was teased a little bit of the apprentice style, finding out who's the nominee. We got the tweet that Rubio got the call. It wasn't him. Burgum got the call. It wasn't him. Apparently, JD Vance found out 20 minutes before the announcement that he was officially selected, which is wild. JD Vance, for those who aren't aware, 39 years old, senator from Ohio, elected in 2022, has a very impressive background and resume, served in the Marine Corps, graduated from Ohio University in 2 years, went on to Yale Law School, where he was an editor at the Yale Law Journal, renowned author of a book that has become a major bestseller and a movie, former venture capitalist, just certainly has an impressive history leading up to this point. I was not, I obviously had seen him on the trail. I had seen him on the 2022 campaign trail. Trump was all in, but there's a little bit more of a storied history between Trump and Vance, and things have definitely changed a little bit over the last 3 to 4 years. John, what's your knowledge on the subject and opinion on Vance as a pick, and what do you know?
I think it's a really interesting pick to pick JD Vance, but to me, what this really shows is that Donald Trump is focused on the future. He picked a running mate who is 39 years old, who largely amongst the strongest supporters of President Trump view JD Vance as the intellectual heir apparent to the Make America Great Again movement. And this could firmly cement Donald Trump's role in realigning the party if it goes according to the plan, in that this would set Donald Trump and his orbit up for 16 of the last 20 years of the president's office if it all goes according to their plan. I think it also is telling about kind of the state of the race and what they see. And it confirms some of the things that the Biden campaign had put out in their memo, where they said really they're focused on the blue wall states. They're focused on Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin as their path to victory. And frankly, they need to sweep those states in order to be successful. I think looking at kind of those Rust Belt states where there is an appetite for some of this new brand of conservatism. It's a little bit more economically populist. It's a little bit more culturally conservative. I think that this is a play that's a shot directly across the Biden campaign bow, so to speak, where they've said we're going to go compete in those states where President Trump was already in the lead. But I think between legacy, between this campaign, really the thing that I'll be watching is what impact does this have on the policy arm of the Republicans, the old intellectual Republicans who want to sit and look at white papers and have those conversations? Because JD Vance is a really interesting guy when it comes to policy, an old school, culturally conservative, kind of populisty Democrat that you used to see. This is a guy who authored legislation with Elizabeth Warren, with Raphael Warnock, has praised the head of Biden's FTC. He's against these big corporate mergers. He sought to claw back bank executives' pay. He has a interesting proposal that he put out that would make birth free in America, where you don't get that fun bill that I know that we're familiar with that comes after you bring a baby home from the hospital. And then regulating rail. And then on the foreign policy side, he has a little bit of America first mindset, and he talks about the war in Ukraine a lot. And so I think it's really interesting to see if that's going to realign the party. And, honestly, I think the biggest thing that's preventing that from happening is that the Democrats don't seem to show any interest in appealing to those voters who were the pro trade, pro free market type conservatives who supported a strong national defense. Instead, they have moved more towards the Bernie Sanders, AOC, Ilhan Omar wing of their party, and those other voters are trapped. And it'll be interesting to see. The last thing that I think will be really that I'll be watching for is how they use JD Vance's conversion story in kind of his conversion into the pro-Trump wing. This is a guy who can go out and with a very straight face say, I said a lot of the things that these never-Trumpers, that the Democrats are saying about Donald Trump. I was wrong. This is why, and this is why I'm on the ticket. And I'll be curious if they try to use that story as a way to give permission to those voters to come over to Trump, because as we've talked about, a lot of the double haters, they started as double haters with Donald Trump in 2016. Then maybe they gave Biden a chance in 2020, but they have regretted that choice. And giving those folks permission, I think between yesterday's programming, between JD Vance, I'll be fascinated to see how the campaign tries to use that to invite those double haters into the party.
I think that's a really interesting take that I had not considered, because he said some really hardcore things about Trump. He in 2021 he said he loathed Donald Trump. Obviously has changed there. He has a really good relationship with Donald Trump Jr. He played a really big role in getting Trump out to East Palestine after the train derailment, and from after that, Trump apparently on the plane home said, "This guy is turning out to be effing incredible." So it was a clear turnaround there. And I love that opportunity to share that story and to win people back over that way. And I think that is a really good messaging. Kelly, what were you hearing yesterday? Were people excited about this pick? Do people know him?
The energy was again something I'd never seen when it was announced, when news dropped that it was JD Vance. It was unbelievable, the enthusiasm and excitement in the room. And I talked to quite a few people. First of all, John hit on one of it. Like, this here is a younger guy now. We've got this young guy. He is energetic. He matches some of the energy that Trump has, but he represents the future, especially to many people closer to his age than, say, Donald Trump's age. I think it also shows that people are able to and can freely change their mind about one another. I think it says incredible things about Trump. Most people see Trump as very revengeful, but here he is, buried the hatchet. Two guys buried the hatchet and found common ground and coming together and now running on a ticket together. So today we took the bus. We had a breakfast. We were taking the bus to our destination, and there on the street, we looked suits walking, and people turned on that side of the bus. It was JD Vance walking with Secret Service. He's in jeans, a t-shirt. He had his three kids with him. One of them's cradle. He's hanging him half upside down, smiling with them. One child is fist pumping the Secret Service. Go look at Glenn Stubbe's photo from today. And I think that will show you why many Americans will be able to identify with JD Vance and what could be the future of the Republican Party. So the energy was great. I had a discussion with AK Kamara because I said JD was a never Trumper. And I had not known this about AK. AK said he's exactly like me. He said, I didn't support Trump. I didn't support him in 2016, but I eventually evolved and came around to be a huge supporter. So it's interesting. And he really is resonating with the younger Republican voters. And I think voters that we don't typically see. I read JD Vance's book back in 2016 before I ever knew anything about him. I think before he was really political. I loved his story. He has a great a true American story of coming from absolutely nothing and building and making what he has today. But from my friends that live in Ohio, I've talked to a few of them since the announcement. They talked about he literally in his camp, he's never lost or forgotten where he came from. He's gone into those areas where the people have nothing and he spends time with them. He listens to them. He talks, he does what he can. He works hard to help them and help them realize you too can take advantage of the American dream. You can be something. Yes, it is hard work, but you can get there. And he gives them hope. And so I think we're going to see that. Even I've seen a shift in President Trump's campaign before he ever got to convention. Look, he was going into areas where people had no hope. Uh, Brooklyn, for example, going into the heart of AOC's district, right? There's a change there too. He's listening. He's appealing to those people. He wants to help them. And I think JD Vance has some of that same energy. Pennsylvania is sitting right in front of us on the floor. They were excited. And somebody mentioned that there's a district he probably helps greatly in Pennsylvania and some of these swing states that we've got to win, that he should be able to bring over a lot of voters there. So the energy behind JD Vance is really positive.
Yesterday, when Becky and I were talking offline, she asked a question that I want to ask of all of you and also see if Becky's answers changed. Do you think the events of Saturday changed the pick as to who it was going to be, or do you think it was always going to be Vance? John, why don't we start with you?
I don't know that it directly was that, but I think from what I have heard, this really was a last minute choice that President Trump had narrowed it down. He had a couple of names, and I think that he was leaning Vance, but really wanted to make sure that he was doing the right thing for his campaign, the right thing for his candidacy, the right thing for the country if he wins. And to the extent that it did, I think, you know, it would only be logical for President Trump to be thinking more about his legacy after such a near death experience that was really something that's very horrifying. So as far as this goes to being a legacy pick, I could see that maybe, but really the names that were largely being thrown around, any of those names really could have fit the bill, right? And you've got Marco Rubio is in his early 50s. You've got Youngkin still has plenty of time. Burgum maybe would be the exception. There was also chatter about Sarah Huckabee Sanders, Elise Stefanik, also young people who could have checked that box. So really, I think this is about more than that. And I think to the extent that it does impact legacy, I think it really gets to the fact that JD Vance is viewed as the heir apparent. He's very close with the family. He's very close with a lot of the similar advisors. So I think that probably played more into it than Saturday's events.
Kelly, what do you think?
I would agree. I from my friends in Ohio, my Ohio friends weren't surprised because President Trump had been in Ohio a number of times for fundraisers and other events where JD Vance was with him in at many of these events. But there's one thing that JD Vance has that I'm not sure about, but he has that military experience. And I wonder about that. He would be comfortable understanding how to conceal carry if he needed to be. But I do think that there was a lot of consideration of JD Vance prior to what happened this week. But I think that he does have that military experience. And I gotta things as things are coming out, I gotta imagine. I wonder if Trump is caught must have to always ask himself, like, can I trust everybody that's around me right now? I think when it comes to JD Vance, the answer is absolutely I can. And that was important to Trump as well.
Becky, you asked, I think, which is, I love this picking of running mates has always been something, whether it's at the state level or the national level. I've not stopped thinking about that question you said yesterday is what impact did it have? And I'm curious, as the person who came up with that great concept and question, have you figured out a little bit where you're at? Do you think the events of Saturday did? Because this was your kind of concept and idea, and I haven't stopped thinking about it, but I wanted to see if you put any more thought into what you had initially described.
Yeah, I have, and I think I agree with the sentiment here. I think JD was always on the short list. I think he was one of 2 or obviously 2 or 3. I think that had the pick been a Rubio, a Haley, or someone a little bit more establishment, mainstream Republican, I would say then yes, absolutely. I think that would have been a kind of tipping point to leaning more and really trying to embrace the whole spectrum of the Republican Party. I do think because we've discussed and John pointed out, and Vance being a never Trumper formally reformed supporter, I think that is an angle as well. I don't know. I think that he probably did look at things differently. And I guess, hey, that's why you wait to make picks to make sure because things change every single day. I don't know. I think that Vance probably was really up there, and I do wanna chat a little bit. So, as I mentioned, he was a really good has built a really big relationship with Donald Trump Jr., has been a long advocate of Vance being the VP pick. While a lot of folks have been vocal against Club for Growth, spent a lot of money against his senatorial bid, Ken Griffin and Rupert Murdoch have lobbied against Vance to Donald Trump. Kellyanne Conway was against Trump as the VP or against Vance as the VP pick. But one, I was reading a political article this morning, and it talked about how, as the search for choosing the VP was nearing its end, Trump Jr. presented his father with an article from a Trump friendly Breitbart News that he knew the former president would hate. The article, he suggested to Trump, was an indication that the North Dakota governor, Burgum, was simply a mainstream Republican figure who was more aligned with the old guard of the GOP than his populist movement. The article's title was Karl Rove endorses Doug Burgum for vice president. And that to me, I love the politics of politics and the kind of gamemanship. And I think it's really funny for Trump Jr. was really behind Vance, wanted Vance. I'm guessing it was obviously from what we were hearing or seeing, Burgum was in the top 3 potentially, and really tried to drive that knife into the coffin there that to axe that for Burgum. And I just thought that was a funny little anecdote that we heard here. It will be interesting to see how some of these Club for Growth already came out with a great statement. We've learned a lot about Vance. He's been a great policy wonk and big on issues, and we're excited for him as the choice. I think I would expect a lot of these folks to come. I can't see we've seen crazier things, but I can't see Ken Griffin or Rupert Murdoch staying out of the race, holding their money because Vance is the pick. I expect there's them still to be there. I'm sure there were a lot of conversations, though. I think that's probably when the two of the biggest donors in the Republican Party come to you and say no. I'm sure that was definitely weighed in the conversation. The last question before we move on from Vance, and we hit on this a little bit. John, you've said exactly what I've been also seeing, that they're looking at Vance as the heir apparent to the MAGA movement. Is what are your anybody's thoughts here? Is this more of the legacy than for political gain, or do we see any real gains that anybody who was on the fence about Trump coming on board, or is it maybe just those folks that, like you said, the double haters that maybe come back? Kelly, what's your take? Does he bring anything new to the world of Trump?
That's a great question. That is the one question that I have heard around on the floor. And I think the answer would be depending on who you talk to, right? But the he will appeal most to those who are within his age range. That is it millennials that are like 38, 39, in the mid to 30s. Is it millennial? My kids are almost there. So anyways, he will appeal mostly. That's a group that he's definitely going to bring together behind Trump. But again, I think he brings many states and whatnot. But look, they've done the footwork to try to make sure that what happens going forward is complete unity. So I can guarantee that the decision to choose Vance was not taken lightly. But I think he does bring that a certain age group with them that are just completely energized down here in Milwaukee and on the floor.
John, what about your take on that?
Yeah, I think we'll get a better sense of that in the coming weeks and months, but I'll be watching very closely how they choose to deploy JD Vance across this campaign. One thing that I think President Trump probably liked is that Vance is very comfortable doing media. He's very comfortable being out there and staying on message. And so the fact is, he gets to be an extra surrogate who's out there. You don't have to really wonder what he's going to say. You don't have to worry about him freelancing too much. But I'll be really curious, do they start sending him to places like Michigan and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and really shore those up? Or do they use him across the country? And does he try to make those inroads with his conversion story to the from Trump hater to Trump backer to vice president? But I think that we'll get a better look at that. But for right now, they're rolling him out. He's doing a lot of interviews, and all of the feedback that I have heard from folks is that he is handling those very well.
One thing I wanted to ask is Trump has there's a little bit of a reputation that Trump has about people going into his orbit and not exiting very well. I think what is remarkable to me is I think that the selection of JD Vance knocks down a bit of that narrative. I know there are a number of people out there that aren't supporting him who was in his administration the last time. But JD Vance said some very harsh things about Donald Trump. He has said harsher things about Donald Trump than I would even ever remotely say about Donald Trump, and I've never voted for him. And so I think that there, as someone who I would classify myself as some, technically I would fall into the definition of someone who's an ever Trumper, but I don't ever consider myself to be anyone who's ever remotely suffered from Trump derangement syndrome because we can talk about it. And so I think for a Republican like me who considers himself to be somewhat homeless, the events of the last 72 to 48 hours and what's going on at this convention, I think as someone who's been watching from the outside, there is something going on here that I think is quite remarkable. I think the Donald Trump that I saw last night, I think was physically different and all of this in a positive way. He looks changed. The selection of JD Vance. And Becky and I had an offline conversation about some of our reactions to it. But what I saw last night and what I've seen how it being packaged so far is, I think, very energetic. Becky, I think that's where I would take it, which differs a little bit from what I had said initially. And I think this is a very interesting convention that we're seeing unfolding here. And as John articulated, we're seeing a realignment. And having the fact that Kelly, you were a Haley delegate and you're at the convention, your perspective, all of you in some ways have been, I think, thoughtful critics of the president. And I think all of us collectively, I think for the first time, and I was the one that was out there a bit, not the one that didn't necessarily fit. I'm seeing something that's happening where I think that this Republican base is coming together in a way. And boy, oh boy, I hope it's not just because of what happened on Saturday, but we can't take that away from it. But I just, in watching that convention last night and seeing who was on there and seeing the broadcast coverage, one thing I will say is watching the live feed and watching the broadcast coverage, as I've said before, I rotate between Fox, MSNBC, and CNN on a regular basis. It was very interesting to me when to see some of the Democratic strategists on these channels talking about the convention and how they were reacting to what was going on. Even they were saying that some of the messaging and the coalition building that was going on was pretty powerful. Was pretty powerful. And I think something is going on. And so I think JD Vance is going to bring something to the ticket. And I think one thing I had not thought about was and John has said this, is some of that criticism that he had of the former president. It's a very powerful message because again, the knock against Trump is that he keeps a tally. It's all about retribution. And he brought a guy on his ticket who said some pretty rough things that I wouldn't say. And now they are together. And this is aligning up in a way that I think is pretty difficult for anyone, whether you're a red hat wearing MAGA person or whether you're a homeless Republican like me who never, this is trending in an incredibly significant way for Republicans, the Trump campaign, and activists that want to see his campaign succeed in something in which I've never seen before.
One last comment I do have on JD Vance is he has a beard. And we have not seen
Wow.
got my little article up here. Last vice president to wear any facial hair was Charles Curtis in the Hoover administration, who sported a neat mustache from 1929 to 1933. Hold on.
Oh, you're just
So
trying to give Joe Biden more ammunition to use his lame Herbert Hoover line against Donald Trump, since that one seems to be working and he's very proud of it. But I think undecided swing voters who are under the age of 50 are probably just wondering what the guy who has the vacuum company did to tick Joe Biden off so much.
How does the facial hair play? Is it first of all, can I just say I'm just pissed about this? The guy's got a full head of hair and he's got a beard. And so, as someone, it's like Rolo getting picked on the ticket. He's got a full head of hair,
it's
comes in with this beard. How does the beard play?
it's great. Here's the deal. Sometimes facial hair benefits a face. If you've seen JD Vance with facial hair and without facial hair, which I have since in the last 24 hours, he's a facial hair guy. However, Trump apparently notoriously dislikes facial hair, but he was asked about it. He said he looks like a young Abraham Lincoln and went from there. So we're going with the facial hair, making history potentially having a VP with some facial hair there.
It's interesting because that's true. We've talked about it. Apparently, Trump doesn't like facial hair, but look at his two sons. They too have facial hair. I think of my son, who he like has facial hair. So I think this may be more appealing to Americans than not. And we'll see what happens, or we'll see if JD decides to shave it off or what. But he wears it. JD Vance wears the facial hair.
He can't shave it off now.
Yeah, true. Yeah. There was that speculation though. If he were the VP pick, would he do that? But look, hey, when does the election happen? November. No shave November coming at you.
It reminds me of the Simpsons episode where Mr. Burns is angry about Don Mattingly having sideburns and the facial hair discussion. I don't think he can shave it. And by the way, I'm offended by this entire conversation, the facial hair, because he has both head hair and now the beard. So I don't appreciate any of this. But it is interesting. Is there a reason anyone can offer a idea as to, with facial hair being so common, why we haven't had elected officials?
It signifies the new future.
I'm just curious, if you guys were advising Vance, would you have said you got to shave it? Would you got a focus group together? Would you have done something like that?
No, makes you different. I
Nobody?
love it. I wouldn't be surprised
I
if
think
there's some polling that comes out.
his look is kind of part of the brand. He's your salt of the earth, kind of Middleton, Ohio country boy. His look, it's part of the brand, I think, of JD Vance.
Didn't who was it? Ted Cruz grew a beard. And I think that was a surprising look, right?
There were a
Becky,
lot of people who had COVID beards, but I'll be really excited to see which academic decides that we need a research paper on this, because those are always my favorite obscure angles of the political campaigns, is when they do the study on this is why you think this about this person based on how they look. There was that big one that came out in 2016, if you remember, that said this is why you don't like looking at Ted Cruz, and had an academic study about the way that the edges of his mouth curve when he smiles. And they found that the percentage of the population whose face works like that are not trusted and not liked when you see them, knowing nothing else about them. So I'll be curious what the new data shows on beards.
and who will read that data will be Becky. She will download that. She will read it. She will study it. And she'll have it researched because that's the type of research she does and the political nerd that she is.
You got to know it. All right. I want to wrap things up about talking about the remainder of the week, what's to come. Kelly, as you mentioned, so each day has a theme. Day one was Make America Wealthy Again, focused on the economy. Day two is Make America Safe Again. It's focused on crime and immigration. Day three is Make America Strong Again, foreign affairs focused. And day four is Make America Great Once Again. And the press release on this said President Donald J. Trump will usher in a new golden age for America. So here we are, day two. We have Tom Emmer is slated to speak tonight along with House leadership. DeSantis, Haley, Huckabee Sanders, Rubio, Trump, and Ramaswamy are all on the slate amongst so many others. Kelly, give us a forward looking. Who are you most excited to see? You've already showed some pictures with Newt and Huckabee Sanders and some others. Who are you most excited to hear from on the main stage? Obviously, aside from maybe Donald Trump, but who are you most excited to hear or see or potentially meet while you're there?
Honestly, all of them. But for tonight, I'm really
Nerd.
excited to hear Emmer and have Emmer shed some spotlight on Minnesota. So that's going to be exciting. I think I love how they've compartmentalized the theme for each different day. I gotta say, most importantly, is historical. I'm most excited about the historical perspective of this. First of all, in 2020, everybody said, every media outlet said Trump is dead, he's done, he's gone. No way could he cut. And here we are, and he's the nominee. But now we also will be the very first public speech that he gives post assassination attempt. That is historical. So every day, I'm just excited for every single day because this is history unfolding. And it's great to be a part of that and to just share in that with so many other great people from across the country.
I've
John,
got
what
one
about
that
for
I've got to
you?
throw out there, and I'm very hopeful that when we got the news late last night that 50 Cent is in attendance at the RNC, that we might get a 50 Cent performance on Thursday night. I'll be down there, and yeah, that would make millennial me very happy.
John, for our list, you're gonna be heading to Milwaukee.
I'll be down there for a couple of days, yeah.
And for our listeners who don't know, what is a 50 Cent? What does he do?
50 Cent is a famous hip hop performer and artist from late 90s, early 2000s, and has since become a pretty successful businessman. Yeah, he actually was on the Hill not too long ago doing some bipartisan work to support the expansion of banking options into the African American communities. Activist, businessman, and artist.
Is it 50 Cent or 50 cents?
It's
50
50 Cent.
Cent.
50 Cent. Okay, I got it. All
I
right, good.
I did
City.
meet I did meet the MAGA rapper Forgiato Blow on the floor. He's not well known, but he's well known in Miami, Florida, and he is a delegate to this. But I think so far one of my favorites, Trace Adkins, at the opening night party and gave a phenomenal performance. So I got to say, every day has just been awesome.
Kelly, also just while you mentioned one of the great parties, the events and parties and celebrations that go on all across the city and even neighboring suburbs are a massive part of this. Anything else that you have slated on the agenda that you're excited to hit up?
I do have a few parties I'm going to. I'm excited. I'm going to be going to the Northeast party. Remember Senator Scott Brown, since he plays in a band. He's going to be the entertainment at that party. It's at the Harley Davidson Museum, which is also a phenomenal place to come visit if you're ever in Milwaukee. So I'm really excited about that. I have some event tickets to certain parties, but that's tomorrow in the afternoon. I'm excited. There's parties happening everywhere. I mean, y- my calendar I could be triple booked. And so I just pick and choose because these are long days, but it's always a good time. And you just run into the most fascinating people just walking the corridors of the Pfizer Forum. I mean, I got to say hi to Laura Trump. It's exciting just meeting some of these people and they're just walking. And if half the people don't recognize who they are, some do, but some don't. But it's just amazing everything happening from inside the forum to outside. And they've got food trucks and they've got the Mecca, the restaurants. You got the CNN political cafe. There's just so much to do.
The most famous, well, I went to the last national convention. I was a delegate in '08. I was at the New York convention in '04. Just two quick stories on random celebrities. I was standing in line at the concession stand at Madison Square Garden in front of someone, and I looked at them and I said, "Weren't you Denise's husband on the Cosby Show?" And it was the actor who played Denise's Cosby on the show. And then I was going down an escalator. I'm like, "Aren't one of you or both of you Brooks and or Dunn?" And they were. And so those are some
Love.
funny things that happen. National conventions are great. The drama. If I was a cajillionaire, I would just go to national conventions because I love political conventions. The swag bags, all of that stuff. I was been doing some renovating and going through some getting rid of some stuff. I found just last weekend, for some reason, I still have a spare bag from the 2004 and 2008 Republican convention where I was a staffer in '04 and a delegate in '08. For some reason, I still have full complete swag bags from both of those conventions that are untouched. But conventions are great on both sides, and I get that sense, Kelly, that you're triple double booked, so it's even more generous that you made time for us today. And John's going to be going over tomorrow, and it's going to be wonderful.
I'll look
Well,
forward to seeing you, John.
thank you guys both so much for joining us. It's a big week. There's a lot going on. We're certainly going to be talking more about the speeches from Emmer and obviously Trump after that fact on Thursday when he is most expected to speak. So if anything comes up, let us know. We'd be happy to chat again. But I really appreciate you both giving us the time, and have fun, be safe, and enjoy.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
We want to thank you for listening to The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky. Before we go, show some love for your favorite podcast by leaving us a review on Apple Podcast or on the platform where you listen. You can also leave us a review or give us a shout out on our website or across all social media platforms at BBBreakPod. The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky will return this week with analysis about the Republican National Convention. Thank you for listening.